Ben Cash, welcome to Listening with Leaders. You're the CEO of a company called Reason One, and the website is reason1inc, all spelled out, .com. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You have a B corporation that is now virtual because of the pandemic of some years ago. Tell us a little bit about what Reason One does and how the heck you got the idea of starting a digital agency to serve it mainly nonprofits.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me on the show today, and as is enjoying the conversation. Looking forward to it. I started the business about 23 years ago, really just to support my music habit, if I'm being honest. I was looking for a creative outlet that was, that would pay better, and I found calling in digital, because much like music, the technique serves the creativity. And I got to solve interesting problems and figure out the technology to support those ideas. And that's how I approached digital. And that got me a fair direction, a fair way into successful business over the years. But at a certain point, kind of found myself wanting more. Or I should say, making more of an impact. And, we'd work with nonprofits and healthcare and a number of types of organizations over the years. And when we actually, I think the culminating moment was a merger that we went through. I was running an agency in the US. I'd met some colleagues in Canada, and we merged our agencies together to sort of have a bigger North American footprint. And we actually had a lot of similar clientele. And a lot of that was nonprofits, impact organizations, healthcare, associations, et cetera. And the challenge of a merger is that when you come together, you have two different competing visions, often two different playbooks, all these different things. And so one of my requirements for the merger was, if we're going to merge, we're going to have to rebrand and set a new name and a new mission, right? So that our collective team had a new flag to charge towards. And when we looked at there's that sort of balance between dressing for the job you want, but also looking at what your own DNA is, right? And I think for a while we tried to dress for the job we wanted, and it just didn't feel right? It just didn't fit. And we looked inward and looked at our DNA. What were we already doing that was making an impact? Where did we get excited to come to work? What was the work that we really relished? And it was the nonprofit work. It was working in healthcare. It was working with helping those who do good do better, right? And so around that time, we were also sort of questioning what our own impact was in our industry and larger community in the world. And we were curious about the B Corp movement. And I had an awesome colleague at the time who was like, we should become a B Corp. So all of those things culminated in the rebranding of Reason One, and the planting of a new flag of using our business as a force for good, both through the impact we make through the clients that we work with, but also in the things that we invest with, the way that we treat our people, the way that we treat the planet. And that was the B Corp path. And so that's kind of how we came to that. From a marketing perspective, it makes a lot of sense running a business and focusing in on a vertical, right? And I learned that the hard way, because we used to be, like a lot of agencies, we were tied to a particular platform, and that was sort of how our leads came in, and we were dependent on that. And if you had a pulse and a budget and you weren't an asshole, excuse me, my French, we would take you on as a client. But that was really hard as time went on, because in the early days, it was like fish jumping in a boat. But as more and more competitors came along, you really had to carve a path, and you had to be niche. And so once we decided to plant a flag with healthcare, associations, and nonprofits, things got a lot more straightforward. It became easier to lead, became easier to focus. And really the most important lesson was that we built community. Because it wasn't just about a marketing, segmenting for marketing and sort of just focusing on this one audience. We realized that we actually were able to align ourselves with our ideal customers, with their industry, and understanding the pain points that they were having. and then building relationships with others who were focusing in on that community. And it was really less about segmentation and positioning and more about community building. And it was such a wonderful thing to find others who were also passionate about helping those who do good do better. And we haven't looked back. Every chance we get, every annual planning, every quarterly planning is all about leaning in and into where we're going. But that's a long answer to your questions.
Oh, it's a beautiful answer, because I mean, think of it, 23 years. That means you started this thing back in 2000, .com bust.
Yeah.
Internet hardly wasn't even going yet. It'd been going since 93, but barely public for 4 years. And the whole concept of web design and HTML those were foreign words to just about everybody.
Yeah, for sure. It was, there was you couldn't YouTube, look on YouTube how to do something,
No.
There were no degree programs in it. There was no, it was, and the irony was a lot of the people who were doing it and who I learned from and actually who I hired were musicians, because the musicians were creative problem solvers, very self-disciplined, practicing very, and also financially starving.
So job, right.
had time to work on it. So, those are the people, those curious, hardworking people who just figured out how to do it. If you could find a book, great. If you couldn't, you just asked. You called somebody up. Hey, how did you figure this out? Or you just bought the software and you tinkered and you experimented until you got it to work. Mm-hmm. But like I said, what was different was there were a lot of people doing that, but they were very focused on the technical aspects. And if you realize that technology is a tool to accomplish an instant mean, right, or means to an end, then you figured out how to use that technology for the end goal rather than just technology for technology's sake.
Right. I remember back in those days, I mean, I learned quickly that when in those days, you had to have 3 disciplines. You had to have graphic design, you had to have content, and you had to have the technical knowledge to put all the graphic design and content into a visually appealing, accessible space online. And today, of course, it's much, much easier to do that than it was then, but quite the challenge. So now you've been in this business for 23 years. You're helping good companies do better. I love that. Is that your tagline?
Helping those who do good do better. It's been one for a while. We're in the process of sharpening it a bit.
Well, that's a good one. What is it that gets you up in the morning today that gets you really excited?
I mean, our industry is constantly changing. You never want for new things to sink your teeth into, new things to learn. I think the realization for me, even with AI coming in and just disrupting everything, and especially our healthcare clients, they're in like a constant state of disruption and changes to the markets. That human behavior, change management, those are the things that are always going to be around. As long as humans are part of the people, process, and technology or the equation, right? There is always a need for getting the right behaviors, figuring out how to change, how to solve the human aspect of that, right? And look, we've been in this business for a long time. We understand the technology, the design, the content, the optimization, the data, and the analytics. We've got people on staff that really love those things. But if we just focused on those things, we'd be a commodity like everybody else, right? Because those things are being outsourced. AI is doing them. There's tools that are replacing the tools of yesterday and of tools of today. So while the baseline is to provide those services in a strong integrated way, it's really about helping people map their future, aligning with stakeholders, figuring out the obstacles to change, and being there long-term to help them execute on that change, right? And that to me is the one constant that will always be there, regardless of all the stuff around us that is constantly in change.
It's really interesting that you should say that, because as a peacemaker, a person who has studied human conflict deeply and practiced as a mediator and peacemaker for many years, that's what I see too. I see all this froth around us, ChatGPT, whatever it might be. But fundamentally, the human person, in our humanity, we still have the same fundamental behaviors, attitudes, reactions, emotions that we've always had. It's just that they're in the context of in a more technical world than not. But at the end of the day, it's responding to that humanity that becomes more important than anything else.
For sure.
And I think a lot of people miss that in leadership.
Yeah, there's a concept I love, sort of a construct. There's if you've ever read the book Brave New Work, Aaron Dignan, phenomenal book. But he talks about the difference between complicated and complex.
Yeah.
And complicated is it's like an engine. There's an ideal state at which it will operate efficiently. And in technology and a lot of things, you can build things and you can create things in design and technology and content. You can get to a pretty ideal state. But once you insert humans into that model, it becomes complex. It's like the weather. There are so many things influencing you. There's no way to simply solve for it. So you have to accept and operate with that complexity in mind. And I think maybe that relates to, that there is no perfect solution. There's no cookie cutter thing that you can apply to everyone, right? And I think a lot of agencies, a lot of professionals and service organizations, they come with that hammer,
right?
And everything's right. But if you recognize the difference between complicated and complex, you realize, especially when humans are involved, that you've got to be thoughtful about how you approach things and ask questions and listen and figure out, how to really tailor things.
Exactly. Hence the name of the show, Listening with Leaders.
Yeah.
I think listening is the foundational skill of all leadership. It's the foundational skill of all relationships. And isn't it interesting that we're never taught how to listen? We pick up listening, sort of hearing, but there is no structured curriculum on these are the different kinds of listening, and this is when you use one kind of listening, and this is how you go about doing it. And here's another kind of listening, and here's why you would want to do that, and when you would want to do it. And yet it's foundational, and yet it's completely ignored.
Yeah, there's no muscle memory for it. It is I struggle with it constantly. I'm sure you ask the people around me and they would say the same, right? It's hard. And I've read The Advice Trap. I've read any number of books about listening and asking questions, and the great book Leadership is Language by, I think, David Marquette. Phenomenal book. Talks about share of voice. And I read all these books, but knowing doesn't translate to doing often, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And
you can have intellectual knowledge about the importance of listening, but unless you have a set of skills that somebody can teach you that allows you to translate that intellectual knowledge into actual action, it just remains intellectual. I think maybe that's the gap that I bridge, because I teach people. What I teach people how to ignore the words and listen to the emotions. And when you do that, it's a different kind of listening. And when you do that, number one, you never get bored. So you're always focused. Two, you never forget what the words are, because all memory is associated with emotion. And three, you have the ability to give somebody a deep gift of validation, what I call listening another person into existence.
Yeah.
And I found this to be an extraordinary skill that really helps people learn how to listen in a very different way. And it's given me great joy, because from training murderers in prison to be peacemakers, to working at the Congressional Budget Office, teaching analysts how to de-escalate members of Congress. I mean,
sure.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, what do you, I'm just curious, because it's something I've, thought about. For you, what is the definition of empathy?
Empathy is the ability to read, assimilate, interpret, and reflect back the emotional experience of another human being. And there are two kinds of empathy: cognitive empathy and affective empathy. Cognitive empathy is the ability to watch somebody have an emotional experience and put words onto those emotions, and then tell people you are angry or you're frustrated. That's cognitive empathy, which is what I teach. When you practice cognitive empathy for a while, usually within a couple of months, then you move into what's known as affective empathy. And an affective empathy, I can watch you and I can feel what you're feeling. And then all I have to do is tell you what I'm feeling because that's what you're feeling. And so I'm relying on my brain's ability to quickly interpret what you're experiencing. And then I can reflect back to you very accurately what you're experiencing.
What am I experiencing, Doug?
Right now, you're curious. Oh, Ben, you're really curious and you're kind of excited. And you're a little intrigued by all of this.
Yeah, sure.
So once you get it, it's really easy to do it.
Yeah.
It's extremely powerful. So you've been doing this for 23 years. What's next? What do you keep doing it? Do you have?
Yeah, you know, every I don't know, 5-10 years, I kind of gonna go, you know, gosh, can I do this? Can I ante up again? And you know, I think or maybe how do I answer that question? Maybe more about just the concept of change for me, right? It's I've sort of had a relationship with over the years. You know, I think early on when I was switching from music to digital, you know, I had this fear of change because my whole identity was wrapped up in being a musician.
There you go.
Right. And that prevented me from change for a long time and sort of feared that loss of identity or loss of success or what have you. And then got into it, realized that was doable. And then, you know, after a number of years, realized, especially through the digital industry, sort of had to embrace change. And then I realized that it wasn't just a matter of embracing it and kind of like accepting it. You actually had to create it. And so that was when it was, 5 years ago, did the merged my agency with another agency, set a new vision, et cetera. And then we went through a pandemic. So it's like we started the merger. There's a pandemic. And then all the stuff that ensued after, right? And went fully remote, and just like the amount of change is like, hold on, right? Hold my beer.
Right.
Yeah. And so in that, I've had some really low moments, right? And it's just some times when I thought I can't do this anymore. And my, now business partner, like we have just had some really tough conversations on the phone, right? And but we always pick ourselves up, in the words of Ted Lasso, be a goldfish, right? And we just kind of, pick ourselves up. And then it's like, as long as we've got a place to go and we got people on board who are excited about where we're going, it's amazing how quickly you can recover. And I think, having a shared reason for your business existing, setting a clear vision, I think those are things, because you have to be moving towards something.
One of the things that I noticed about your business is that you're really big on inclusion and bringing in young people, maybe young people who are disadvantaged, people of color, or just disadvantaged, and working with them. Tell us a little bit about how you manage that.
Sure. Well, our industry has a diversity problem, right? And there are marginalized communities that are not, who are that our industry traditionally has kept out for a variety of reasons. And when we became a B Corp, it changed the way that we looked at things, that looked at problems, looked at our industry, our community. And so when we would discover something, we had to ask ourselves, how are we going to show up? How are we going to, react and try to change? And, I think for us, it was during the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. And, we in the moment, we're like, how are we going to show up and support this community? And, just the statistics of our industry, we're like, we have to help bridge this gap in the technology industry. And so we decided to create a scholarship and mentorship program. We're in our 3rd year now of the program, and it's been a successful program so far. And it was partly about finding people who are in the technology space, looking to, who were encountering barriers, whether financial or otherwise. And so we would find those folks both in South Carolina, where some of our U.S. offices are, and in Ontario, where some of our Canadian offices are. and find those students and support them financially. But also over the course of a year, we would pair them with, rowers, as we call them, our Reason One colleagues, pair them with a rower, and we would, support them with whatever journey they want, whether that was looking for a job, navigating the job market, whether that was being a student for the first time, looking for internships, whatever it might be. We were there for the year, and then we've maintained relationships after that. And we're not going to change the whole industry by any stretch, right? We're playing in our pond here and making the impact we can. But we hope what we're doing will also have a ripple effect, and other agencies will follow suit.
You've had, I would suspect that you've had a really powerful effect on some young lives.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Actually, what is amazing is that, you would think, well, because when there's an ignorance about a problem and you look at the stats and you don't really understand what's behind those numbers. Why is this, right? And the biggest eye opener was how much talent was there in the Black community in Canada and the US. And that it was the industry barriers that were preventing all this amazing talent from really showing up in the industry. And so we met just some amazing people who were like everybody, right? All humans. We all have our SHIT that we're dealing with. We all carrying baggage, right? Anybody don't believe social media, right? We all have it. But the things that they were carrying and still achieving, still persevering was amazing. And so that was just the most rewarding thing, was getting to meet some of the candidates, and also work with some of the mentees. Humans. Yeah.
I mean, as I was just watching you, I can see how moved you are by this and by the work that you've done.
Yeah.
And has that been an experience that's been shared throughout the company?
Yeah. I think, what's the phrase I always love to say? How you do one thing is how you do everything. Mm-hmm. And I think, in this particular case, the Reason One mentorship and scholarship program, there were people who stayed at Reason One who may have otherwise left, right? And we have a lot of turnover in the past few years, right? Who left because of the investments we're making there, or because of the work that we do and the types of organizations that we work with, or because of the way that we, as a B Corp, care for our people, because of the equity and pay that we create, because of so many different things where our values turn into action, turn into the way that we operate, the way that we show up. And I think that has impacted our team. And ironically, we were we had festive Fridays at work, on occasion, and we'll do like a gratitude moment where everybody kind of shares stories and how they're doing and what they're grateful for. And just the vulnerability, the way people feel supported and seen, and it makes for, it's why I'm excited. It's why to your earlier question, it's why I'm still doing this 23 years later. It's because of the people. And if you can create an environment where people are valued and people first, it's amazing the things that they can achieve and that they'll do for the business and for themselves. And anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, but it's
you're touching on a really important point that I don't think that a lot of leaders get, and that it's the importance of having an emotionally and psychologically safe place for people to come to.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like that's what you've created.
Yeah.
And we know from Google study that took 10 years, that the highest performing teams at Google have psychological and emotional safety.
Yeah.
And teams that don't have that, they don't work. They're dysfunctional. And you've created it, probably without thinking about it.
No,
But-
it's actually in whatever, if you look at our, like,
Okay,
one of our, like,
value
like
statements.
our like VTO, or, vision traction organizer, whatever is, EO sort of, like, one of our statements is about creating a psychologically safe and inclusive work environment, right? It was written out, and it's something we've been working on, but I say all that, like, we still have so much to go. We're not perfect. We, I'm sure I know we get it wrong on occasion, but it's a journey, and we've got as a business, one of the things that we invested in was a VP of people, and she's been amazing in helping us set that, making sure that we live our values out, and that we're following, our actions match our words.
It's so refreshing to hear that you have a VP of people who is not all about compliance, that is there to figure out how do we create an environment where people can thrive.
Yeah.
I mean, compliance is important.
Oh, look,
That's a lawyer.
HR hat and vision. Like, there's definitely a balancing act there.
Right, but still, the fact that you've got somebody who is able to figure out how do we comply, but also create an environment that where our people feel welcome and safe and like they can really grow, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
And it's unusual.
Oh.
Good job.
Thanks.
One more question, I'll let you go. All right, so you spent your first part of your life studying trombone and playing trombone, so we know about that. But what's one other thing about you, Ben, that we would not know about unless you revealed it to us?
Gosh. I think I don't know, I love to whistle. That's kind of random.
You get an opportunity to do that much?
Well, not if my wife has anything to say about it.
It's a good excuse to take the dog out for a walk then, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
All right, then. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was just a wonderful conversation.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Pleasure.